Hey guys, it's Stapleton here. I'm just going to talk about the lasting consequences of the Flint water crisis. According to the NPR, the government claimed that tests were performed on Flint's water to assure its quality, but the officials failed to properly purify and treat the water with anti-corrosion chemicals. With no surprise, it was not long before the effects of poor quality of water became obvious to the general public. The most obvious concern that still faces the mistreated people of Flint is the long list of possible adverse health effects that can arise from prolonged exposure to lead and other dangerous chemicals in the water supply. Pregnant mothers and developing adolescents are the most prone to life-altering damages from chemical exposure. Healy explains that other than the established link between lead exposure and neurodevelopment challenges in children, lead can affect children's ability to learn, exhibit self-control, and engage in successful social interactions. In other terms, lead exposure in children can destroy their lives before they even have the chance to live. The health crisis does not stop there. In a small survey of the Flint people during the Flint water crisis, researcher Here Garris found that 65% of surveyed Flint adults reported negative impacts in their health since the water source switch. Furthermore, over 20% of surveyed adults admitted to an increased reliance on harmful coping mechanisms such as alcohol and drugs. A less obvious and yet potentially more damaging effect of the Flint water crisis is the loss of trust in the government. It should come to no surprise that people tend to not trust the government after a horrible and gross misuse of power and resources such as the Flint water crisis. As reported by Data USA, the race of a majority of people in Flint is African American, and a larger part of the community, 42% to be exact, lives below the poverty line. African Americans and those in poverty are no stranger to the abuse and neglect that is frequently displayed by the United States government. Because of this, the two groups are not going to take a crisis like Flint lightly. 2 years into the Flint water crisis, a group of researchers held a public forum for the youth of Flint to discuss feelings and attitudes towards the crisis. Of those who attended, almost all were African American descent, and they fell in between the ages of 13 and 17 years old. When asked to describe their view on the Flint water crisis, Muhammad found that many of the kids felt the crisis was deeply rooted in racism, with some even going as far as to say the water was purposely contaminated as a way of propagating genocide. Whether there is truth in that statement or not, the feelings that these mistreated kids are feeling are real. For the youth, this is the beginning of a long life filled with distrust and the lack of faith for their government. For the adults who are far too familiar with the malpractice of the United States government, this is nothing new and only reconfirms their beliefs. All of this is not to suggest that people should blindly trust in the government, but rather point out that there is a growing distrust in the government due to the reoccurring instances of abuse of power and failure to take care of the people the government swears to protect. Although the water quality eventually improved, the gross negligence of the government on both the local and federal levels, as well as the lasting health impacts that are a direct result from the prolonged exposure to toxic water, have left the people of Flint upset, untrusting, and ultimately unhealthy. Those responsible for the Flint water crisis need to not only be held accountable, but also made into an example of what can go wrong when people in power neglect the citizens and infrastructure that desperately require its attention. Buckley explains that Flint was not an isolated event, for the vast majority of American water infrastructure is outdated and prone to failure. For instance, places like Martin County, Kentucky, and the Navajo Nation are also facing the grave consequences of decaying infrastructure. No one ever thinks that something as vital as the water they drink from their home will poison them, until it actually does. Now, this should not be the case, but it is a harsh reality we live in. I encourage you all to not wait to address this problem until it directly affects you, as it is already affecting those around you. With all of the lasting adverse health effects and distrust for the government, something has got to give. Water should not be a privilege. Water is a basic need and a right that the government should guarantee access to every citizen, no matter their class or race. To set the scene, I want you all to watch a short segment from Charity Water.
Our planet has water. We just need to help people get it. When we do, it brings all kinds of changes. Clean water improves health, gives kids more time in school, empowers women, boosts economies, and gives hope for a brighter future. Clean water changes just about everything.
Despite the seemingly hopeless state of the situation I have laid out for you all, this problem is solvable. And my hope is that you are a part of the change. So my question is, what are you going to do about it?